My guest on this episode of the Living Peace podcast is Chantel Chapman. Chantel Chapman is the founder of WT Finances. She's the mindful money coach known for her edgy, relatable, and soulful mindful financial literacy guidance. In her work, Chantel draws on her experience as a mortgage broker, personal finance coach, yogi, and a meditation teacher. Outside of being a mindful money teacher and credit expert, Chantel is working on building an accessible alternative to traditional post-secondary education. You can learn more about Chantel Chapman by visiting www.whatthefinances, all one word, .ca. Chantel Chapman, welcome to Living Peace podcast.
Thank you, Henry. I'm so excited to be doing this with you.
Thank you. It is a joy to have you. So Chantel, I was reading a lot about you, and I really just decided to start by asking you to tell us what it is that you do.
Sure. So I would call myself an educator. I'm a mindful money teacher. So I work with people who are dealing with financial distress. I also work with a lot of entrepreneurs as well, and help them position their brand in a way that connects with who they are and aligns with their purpose. The two might seem very, very different, but they're actually so similar, because when people come to me and I work with them around their financial distress, there's a little bit of a loss of self happening, not so aligned with their path, working from a place of maybe past trauma, and it's creating bad relationship with money. When I work with entrepreneurs, it's a very, very similar thing. So they're looking to get back on their path, their journey, something that aligns with themselves, and not be so orientated in the past, and really kind of get into the present moment. So it's interesting because the two avenues that I work with, they're so similar. It's just we're kind of focusing on different things.
And even though in my job title, money does not figure into my job title. Actually, it sounds like what you and I do is quite similar, because I work with a lot of people who are having very difficult conversations about money.
Yeah.
And so I am wondering, Chantel, if you have any insight about why conversations about money are so challenging for us. What makes it so challenging to talk about money?
Well, I think in our society, the conversation of money is so taboo. In North American society, it's a little bit more welcome to discuss money, because the main narrative here is such an economic one. So we're slightly more comfortable in comparison to, I have one of my business partners is from Italy, and listening to her talk about her family and the conversations around money, it's a lot more taboo in Europe to talk about it. So, we're slightly more open in North America, but it's still very, very uncomfortable. And what we do present outwardly when we talk about money is never really the negative stuff. It's always I've done this. I'm ambitious in this way because can buy this, and I can keep up with the Joneses, or in our world, keep up with the Kardashians. So there's outwardly, we're talking about money. We're having these conversations that have this economic narrative underlying, but we're not getting to the real deep conversation, the painful parts of it, the grasping that we have around money, the aversions that we have around money, the attachments that we have. That's the part of the conversation that's harder for people to talk about. And what the question is, why is that? I think it's just because we've been so programmed to grow up in this economic narrative that's based on consumerism that we feel inadequate if we're not fitting into that world, right? So to have a real raw conversation about the soul of money and the way that we interact with it means that we might be showing our inner fears and our, I guess, inner longing for feeling like we belong, feeling love, feeling safe. And it's very scary to expose that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, Chantel, if I'm hearing you right, we here in North America can really talk about money, perhaps a little bit more comfortable talking about money on a sort of superficial level.
Yes.
And it generally centers around having or not having something that the money stands for. Yet we never really get to the really deep conversations. Conversations with money really connects with our most fundamental needs, our needs for connection, our needs for meaning, our need for expansion, and really going deep with that. So I'm wondering, how do you, in your practice, in your work, have these conversations that go deep, that touch on these things that we are so insecure about and so uncomfortable about, that go to the very core of some of our most fundamental fears and discomforts?
Yeah, so great question. In my practice and the way I work with people, it's my first step is to create an environment and a space that feels comfortable. So when I meet with clients in person, if I'm doing an event, if I meet with them on video call, we always take a moment to just like slow down and take a deep breath in. And just really like sink into the space, feeling the support underneath us of the chair, wherever we're sitting, taking time to kind of connect. That's always step one. And once we get to that place, we're giving ourselves the time and the space to pull away from the hijacked part of the brain. Because what happens when someone is about to talk about money is they start getting quite emotional, and it's hard for them. And I see a lot of people that I work with, a lot of emotions do arise, and that's totally normal. So I also set the stage for them and let them know that you are going to get emotional. This is going to be hard to talk about, but this is a safe container to do this. So that's an incredibly important part of my practice. And then I use some of my own storytelling as an example so that they know they're not alone, because you were talking about like that, the deepest needs as a human being. Oftentimes, like there's a lot of narratives around our relationship with money that impact the way we deal with money, even the way we discuss money. And oftentimes these narratives, they can come from, the programming, the consumerism programming the economic narrative that we get from society, but also childhood narratives. But below every single narrative, it always comes down to two things I'm always seeing. One, I want to feel loved. And two, I feel fear, right? So I just cut to that right away and say, hey, listen, this is typically like what's going to come out. And you're also going to start noticing things that when we start talking about money and your relationship with money, you're going to notice that you're going to see some similarities between the way you're handling money and the way you handle your time, or your relationship with food, or maybe your relationship with codependency and relying on people. Money is simply a tool that allows us to have an insight into a greater picture on what's going on. So when I start talking about it and framing it like that, from a place of being very open and non-judgmental, people start to relax. And it's definitely the reaction that I get from clients is like, I haven't heard about it like this way. Because a lot of times people will come and work with me and they've maybe been working with financial planners or even debt counselors. And there's a lot of like shame tied to that, you know? So to start off by taking away that shame and creating that safe container, like I said, is absolutely, it is the foundation of all the work that I do. They need to know that they're safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And something that I'm hearing from you, Chantel, is again something that I do a lot in my work and teach others to do, and that is first to tune in.
Yeah, tune in. Yeah,
and that's how we get to that mindfulness piece, which I know is very, very critical in both of our work. So just tuning in and then observing without evaluating, both within ourselves and then within other people. But something else that's arising for me as I am listening to you is I think of all this new age success literature, in the film like The Secret and Think and Grow Rich, all of these programs and books that talk about the law of attraction and abundance and attracting. And for me, my concern with all of this literature is that I think it's missing a piece. So there's a lot of focus on how to attract a new car, a new house, a parking spot, whatever it is. But there is relatively little emphasis on where the attraction is coming from. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with what you're saying, Henry, and I relate to that because I hear a lot, like especially in my space that I work in, a lot about manifesting your dream car, manifesting this, manifesting that. And I feel like it's setting a lot of people up for failure because there's such a big missing component there. And there's the one thing is like manifesting material things. Like, well, first of all, when I work with clients and that is their number one goal, I can already tell there's something there that needs to be healed, right? And if you're going to be living a life that's longing for a manifestation of material things, it feels to me like it's going to be a life of longing and potentially suffering. So that's always something that I listen very closely to and like to address. And I feel like that's missing in the manifestation conversation. Like, what is it that you're manifesting? Another thing too is you cannot be in a place of suffering and stress and chaos in the brain and be manifesting at the same time, because that chaos and that stress is going to, you're basically using the positive thinking to disassociate with the healing that needs to happen, right? So that's something that I think is important. I think manifesting is a beautiful practice. Creating a vision for yourself is a beautiful practice, but there's a certain level of, awareness that has to happen. There's a certain level of healing that has to happen. So we're not moving from a place of suffering to disassociation to grasping and longing, and then that becomes a cycle versus truly becoming free, because we've actually done the work to heal And then we can get to a place of manifesting from clarity and creative detachment and really, connect with our vision and really align with a path that feels very good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think, in other words, it's where the manifestation coming from. Is it coming from our neurosis
Yeah.
and the state of wanting? What you talked about earlier, consumerism, the constant desire to have more, better, bigger,
Yeah.
um, because that's the only way we feel good about ourselves. So that
Mm-hmm.
becomes big. Or coming from a place of clarity, from a place of peace, where vision arises, and without being attached to that vision, we start taking concrete steps towards that vision, always being open
Mm-hmm.
to that
Yeah.
vision changing and modifying and being open to other opportunities. And then it seems that manifestation happens on a
Mm-hmm.
whole different level,
Mm-hmm.
a whole different experience of
Yeah.
manifestation.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, in terms of talking about abundance and money, we have to have a conversation about the deeper meanings behind that. So do you find that when you create space for your clients and work with them, do you find them to be forthcoming about what's truly at the bottom of it? How do you get to the bottom of what's behind their money issues?
So yeah, they, yes and no. I've had some situations where I've had clients who, um, they will tell me a story and then they'll send me an email and say, actually, this is really what's going on.
Mhm.
To me, as a teacher, I look at situations like that and I say, I need to make sure that they understand that this is part of their process. That the fact that I even didn't tell the truth, that's part of the process. That's part of the pain that needs to be healed, right? So, I always make sure that I explain that to them, and there's no guilt, there's no shame. And a lot of times when I'm working with people, there's this level of disclosure that happens.
Mhm.
Like, Chantel, I feel really awful. I went on a shopping spree and spent a bunch of money. And typically the first time they tell me that, they delay in telling me because they're so afraid of what I'm going to say because of the programming that they've experienced their entire life. And my reaction is always very positive and very caring, and one that is nurturing, and we try and unpack it and understand it. And so from that moment, like, I'm always so grateful for those opportunities when someone doesn't want to say something, but then they do, and then we work through it, because in those moments, that's where we have the greatest realizations and the greatest lessons.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so I haven't really experienced people holding back too much, because I do a lot of work around making people feel very safe. That's a lot of foundational work that takes place in the beginning of a relationship with the client. And I do that too with my own humility, sharing stories of the mistakes that I've made, and making sure that they know that I've been there. And we talk a lot about the world that we live in, and us trying to fit into the world that we live in is the crazy thing, not us being honest and saying, hey, I racked up my credit card and I have no money to make a payment. That's not crazy. The
Mhm.
crazy thing is that there's neuroscientists that work with marketing companies and copywriters to create messaging that convinces us to buy something that we don't need when we can't afford it. That's the crazy thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And Chantal, you touched on something I think that is really critical, as I found in working with a lot of people who are going through difficulties, and that is the connection between money and addiction
Yeah.
and compulsive behaviors. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's an amazing doctor that I've done some training with here actually in Vancouver, Dr. Gabor Mate. He's written a couple wonderful books, and he's worked with addicts quite a bit. And he defines addiction as when we do something over and over again to temporarily release pain and increase pleasure in the moment that has negative consequences. So when you hear that definition, it gives you some permission to say, wait a minute, I look at my Instagram in that way, or I eat chocolate in that way, or I hang out with toxic people in that way because it's like fun to go out to eat, or I go to Whole Foods 5 nights a week to get food quickly because in the moment I need that emotional satisfaction. And versus like traditionally we think of someone in addiction as, oh, they have a substance abuse problem, they are a drug addict, or they're an alcoholic. And I think to some level we all are addicts, and we're all addicts because of this world that we live in and the programming, the consumerism programming that we have, right? So I've studied addiction quite a bit, and I use the work that I've done in addiction in my work quite a bit, because a lot of the behaviors that I see with people who have financial distress are so similar to addiction. So, I always say, like, every single person, especially if you live in the North American Western society, you need to create your own program, whether it's a 12-step program, whether it's a spiritual program, whether it's a program where your higher power is quantum physics, whether your program is all about community and building relationships. But you as an individual have to define a program that's not the narrative that this Western society is ran by. Because if you do not, it's so easy to move to the loss of self.
Mm-hmm. And I think just building on that, Chantel, I am observing in this culture crisis of meaning, and when I say this,
Yeah.
in North America, in the West generally, where more and more people find very little meaning in their existence and
Yeah.
in their everyday life, and so then money or sex or drugs or what you name it. Becomes that way to create meaning,
Mm-hmm.
except that it never does.
Yeah.
And so then people find themselves in these spirals,
Yeah.
um, searching for more and more meaning, and yet looking in all the wrong places.
Yeah.
So, can you talk maybe a little bit about the conversations you have with people that go really deep, that go
Yeah.
towards meaning? What is ultimately why do they need money? Why is money relevant or important for them, aside from having a place to live or fitting in with someone else? How do you
Yeah.
have those conversations?
Yeah. So I love that question, and that search for meaning is a core part of the work that I do with my mindful money clients. But it's also a core part of the work that I do with the entrepreneurs that I coach. And I always use this example with both clients, and it goes back to philosophy. So I'm a big philosophy nerd, and there was this philosopher, and he came up with this. He was searching for, what is the meaning of life? What is true happiness in life? How is someone really in a state of well-being? And he said, I think that true happiness lies in this hedonic lifestyle. So hedonic meaning doing something to increase pain or pleasure and decrease pain. So the more pleasure we have in our life and the less pain, the happier we'll be in our life. Sounds very similar to the definition of addiction. This hedonic, hedonism, increase of pleasure, decrease of pain. Wonderful if it can last a long time, but oftentimes it doesn't, because as human beings we experience the seasons of emotions, and that's the beautiful part of being a human being, the ups and downs, the cycles, right? And so Aristotle came around and he's like, no, 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 that is not the way to happiness. And he came up with this word called eudaimonic happiness or eudaimonic well-being. And the word comes from diamond, so eudaimonic, diamond. And if you think of the way a diamond is made, it's a rock and it goes through a lot of pressure, and it comes out and it's incredibly beautiful. So what Aristotle said is eudaimonic well-being is really when you connect to a vision and meaning, you have a sense of purpose, and you also find states of flow in your life. So these two concepts, hedonic well-being, eudaimonic well-being, they've been studied by psychologists and therapists for many, many years. And I've read many research studies about them. And sure enough, they have found that people who live a hedonic life, they see higher levels of depression, and they see higher states of like maybe bliss, but it doesn't last very long. Whereas someone who lives a eudaimonic life, they're connected to a greater purpose. They're connected to something that is meaningful. They're passionate about. They're finding ways to access flow states in their life. So we can access flow states through meditation. We can access flow states through going for a long run. Coders who code programs, if they love that, they could get into a flow state doing that. Through art, we can access flow state, through community, through dance, all these different things. And then that, alongside of something that is meaningful and connecting us to our purpose, they found that they saw lower levels of depression in people who live their life like this, and longer lasting feelings of bliss. So one thing that I do with both my sets of clients, the entrepreneurs I coach and the mindful money clients I coach, is I have them do an inventory on their life, and they look at time and they look at money. And I mean, depending on they could look at other avenues in their life, and they will do an inventory and categorize what part of their life is hedonic and what part of their life is eudaimonic. So if we're talking about a money client, we'll look at their discretionary spending. And oftentimes they see that the money that they don't want to be spending is hedonic spending. And then we look at that and we're like, okay, well, what's this pain that you're trying to run away from right now? And then we spend some time trying to figure out what that pain is. Yeah. So going back to the eudaimonic side, once we kind of do that inventory, then we spend some time starting to define their eudaimonic life. So we look really at some of their passions in their life, some of their desires that are not hedonic desires, and then we start working on this amazing concept that was created by one of my friends, Cameron Harold, called a vivid vision plan. So we basically map out, like, in 3 years, who do you want to be? But we do this from a very meaningful place. What type of work do you want to do? How do you want to show up in the world? What type of change would you like to see in the world? And then we start mapping out either their business or their financial life around that. Once they can see that vivid vision, it's so much easier for them to always go back to that as their higher power if they don't have another higher power that they connect with, and follow along with that so they know that they're continuing on this eudaimonic path.
And Chantel, as I'm listening to you, what I'm thinking about and what's arising for me is really that our educational system is really very supportive of that hedonistic path.
Yeah.
And it's primarily teaching children, young people to fit in, and it's very much an industrial revolution, an industrial revolution based education system that is preparing people to become little particles in a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult to find meaning if you are just a part of a bigger machine. I know in our previous conversations, I know education is something you're very, very passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on what can we do to change our education, to change our educational system, to create people that are more connected with their meaning, more connected with their purpose, who are more prepared to not just exist or barely, not just exist, but live fully, live a truly meaningful and serviceful life?
Mm-hmm. Wow, that question, Henry. There's so much that could be done with the educational system. I guess I want to start off by saying the educational system is it's so linear with time, which I think is one of the challenges, because that linear time is part of that programming that says you go to school, then you graduate, and then you go to post-secondary, you go to college or university, and then you finish, and then you get a job, and then you buy a house, and then you know, buy this and you buy that, and you just keep buying and buying, and then, you know, that's just really what life is. You fit into this society, and that's kind of how it is. So the linear part of the education system, I find to be a bit of a problem. And I work with a lot of teenagers, and the pressure that teenagers are under when they're like 16, 17, to know the answer to what they're going to do for the rest of their lives it's crazy to me. Like, if someone came to me and said, you know, what's the purpose of life? What are you going to do? Like, why are you here? That's the biggest question you could ask. And we're putting all that pressure on teenagers because as soon as high school is done, you have to go to college and you have to know exactly what you want to do. Because if you don't know exactly what you're going to do, you're going to waste money, because college is very expensive. And the return on investment of college is not really there anymore. Right? So there's that whole side of it as well. College and university in North America is a consumer product, right? And so I think our relationship with time, and just understanding that things change, and as we grow and as we evolve, we realize, like, really more and more what our path is. So that's one side, is taking some of the pressure off the time, allowing people the space to go through the self-realization. And, you know, just thinking about teenagers making the decision of going to college or university, we know that the teenage brain is not one that is equipped to answer the greatest questions in life, right? So that's one side of it. The other part that you asked was the element of service.
Mm-hmm.
I just thinking that's such an interesting question, Henry. And I'm thinking about, like, my experience in school, and I don't feel like there was any element of service in school that I was taught whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So that right there is where is the focus on that? Where is the focus on being of service? Mm-hmm. You know? So that's really missing. And I do have an online school, and part of my online school is every single time we sell a course, we give free access to someone in a marginalized community. And that's how we are of service. So we've actually built it into our business model.
Mhm.
And the reason why we did it that way versus, just giving money to a charity, which we do as well, is I really want a student who buys a course to feel the impact of their choice for that education and connect to that feeling of service. Because you're right, it is missing. It's definitely missing. So that question is just such a big question. There's just so much we can do in the education system. I also think the cost of post-secondary education in North America, it really creates a divide between the rich and the poor, and it creates the marginalized communities marginalized, or it keeps the marginalized communities marginalized. So there's a whole other issue economically going on around there, which is really social injustice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Chantel, one of the reasons I asked you about education, and I know, of course, how passionate you are about it, but I also know that in your own personal journey,
Yeah.
maybe slightly less linear path.
Yeah, definitely.
Most people take, and obviously that has worked well for you. So, do you mind sharing your story, your journey of how
Sure.
you
Yeah.
got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up at one point in my life, I was with a single mother, and my dad was an addict, and we lived in social housing. So I lived and experienced being in a marginalized community in poverty. As I was growing up, just the opportunity of going to a good school, it wasn't really, it didn't feel available to me.
Mhm.
It's almost like the bar was set so low for me. And yeah, so I just didn't even really have that on my radar because I didn't think I could. And I think it's because I knew it was really expensive. I knew, my mom didn't have the money, and so there was that whole thing going on. Um, and then on the other side, because I grew up in an environment where there was scarcity economically, it created a fuel in me that I really desired safety and security. So what that played into for me was working as soon as I could get a job. When I was a teenager, I worked full time and went to high school. And then when I graduated school, I worked incredibly hard. I worked 2 jobs. I became self-employed as a mortgage broker at 21. And I was just kind of like, I would call it ladder hacking. Like in our society that's so linear, we're supposed to, work our way up, get the job, work our way up to the next level, get the promotion, graduate school, et cetera, et cetera. It's very linear. And I was just looking for opportunities that I could shortcut to give myself that sense of security that I felt like I didn't have growing up. So I became a mortgage broker at 21. Nobody gets a mortgage from a 21-year-old. So what ended up happening is I felt really inadequate in that role. And because as a mortgage broker, I was self-employed, I wasn't making any money unless I could close a mortgage. So I really hustled, and I taught myself everything I could possibly know about business, finance, marketing, because I needed to close some deals. And it really came out of that desire for the security. I decided in that kind of process of teaching myself for survival, I did take some classes at college, like in economics, but I always had this like rebellious side to me where I would never go to the exams because I was like, I don't need your approval. I'm just here for the education. And my approach was also, was always finding education in different sources and self-education. So I read a lot. And I would find out like what some of the university and college courses, what their reading lists were, and I would go and buy those books and I would just read them on my own accord. So that was really kind of a lot of my own education. And then I found teachers. I found people that I guess they could be mentors or teachers, people that I looked up to, and I read their stories. I wanted to learn from them and what they did, and that's really kind of how my education came together. And as I was working as a mortgage broker, my path really started to unfold when I had this opportunity to open a marketing consulting company. So I did that for a while, and I left the mortgage world, and I started consulting for large corporate finance companies in Canada, working in PR and marketing, but all within the finance realm, and working with a lot of different entrepreneurs. And then, just really surrendering to my path and being open to what comes next, it kind of put me in the position to open my mindful money business. Just because I was working through my own story, my own pain around money. I knew everything there was to know about finance and how it worked. And that all just came together. It just came together. And that's kind of where I'm at today. And then the education business that I have. So my education company teaches creative entrepreneurs about business. And we do it in a very unconventional way. Our teachers in that school are people who have created their own path. They didn't go the traditional route. And I really want to showcase those stories because I don't want someone, some person who grows up in a poor community to think that they don't have a way out of the cycle of poverty because they can't afford the tuition to go to university. I want these stories to be showcased as inspiration to break those patterns for people and allow them to be elevated and rise out of the pain that they've experienced. So as you hear me talking about this, you can probably get a feel for the underlying meaning and purpose behind all the work that I do. And I was so lucky to be able to discover that many years ago, and I have that written down, and I always go back to that. Anytime a new opportunity comes up, I go back to my basically my mission and my purpose and my commitment to be of service. And I say, is this opportunity aligned with that? Yes, wonderful. Open yourself to it, surrender. If it's not, no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How beautiful and really inspiring. And I'm so glad, Chantel, that you shared your story.
Thank you.
Because I think it's really a true inspiration. I certainly felt very inspired as I was listening to you, but I think it's inspiration to many people in that they don't have to take the linear path. The linear path is not the only thing that is there, and that sometimes when we take a path that is not so linear, there is greater meaning, purpose, and opportunity to serve there. And I think embody that. So I thank you for it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, Henry, your teacher, Anand, said to me one time that when I spend time, really connecting to myself, what will flow through me is that detached creativity. And through that, and that resonated so deeply because through that detached creativity, it is really where I've kind of arrived in the place that I am with my work. That is, detached creativity allows me to say, I can do this. I don't have to follow this path that goes like this. If I detached myself through this, the creativity to create and deliver what I want to do that's connected to my meaning, my vision, it just flows. and it flows with so much ease.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because then it's coming from that place, the space of peace.
Yeah. The space of
You
peace. Yeah.
know, and truly something else that Anand has taught, and that has influenced my work in a great deal, was also that, we so often we either suppress or express whatever is
Yeah.
rising within us, right? So if we're talking about emotion, suppress or express our emotion or our desire or our wants, and both really can be quite violent.
Yeah.
Both suppressing or expressing, because it can come from our conditioning and compulsions and addictions, and the pressure to fit in into that
Mhm.
linear path. And then when we start learning meditation or some of the other mindfulness practices, we find that there is a third way. And the third way is to observe. And the more
Mhm.
we observe, then the more spaciousness there is in our life. And then that spaciousness allows us to have that sense of detachment. And then for things to arise from that detachment. And then it's truly what we talked about earlier. That space of detachment is a space of true abundance. For me,
Yes.
that's where
Yeah.
all of that starts to arise from. It is not from sort of a neurotic mind and constantly thinking about things and planning and figuring out what we're taught in traditional approach, but actually having a lot of silence, a lot of
Hmm.
and tuning in, and then letting things rise from there.
Beautiful. Yes. I really feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Chantel Chapman, thank you so much for joining us here on the Living Peace podcast. I
Thank
know
you.
I know in the description we'll put how our followers, listeners can get in touch with you and follow you and follow your work. I don't know if there is any programs that you have coming up that you want to mention, or mention perhaps a way that people can reach out to you. As I said, we'll put it in the description. But if there's anything like that you would like to add, please.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I actually, well, you'll have my website up there, what the finances. But I have a mindful money course, online course launching soon. And like I've mentioned before, I do work one-on-one with clients. And yeah, but besides that, Henry, I'm so grateful for this time and this conversation with you. It was so nice to chat with you.
Well, thank you, Chantel.
Thank you.
Let me just stop recording.